Hello everyone, my name is Rachel, and this is my review of The Glass Bead Game by Hermann Hesse, which is a very complicated book I will probably not do justice to. I think in the United States, Hesse is best known for some of his other novels like Siddhartha and Steppenwolf, but The Glass Bead Game was his last novel. It was published in 1943 and first translated into English in 1949. However, the translation in 1969 by Richard and Clara Winston is considered to be the translation that best conveys Hesse's original intent, and it is the translation that I read. You could briefly summarize the plot of this book by saying it is the fictional biography of a man named Joseph Knecht who lives in a futuristic world in a place called Castalia, which is like a province in Europe that has been established purely to preserve and study humanity's knowledge and to play and nurture the titular glass bead game. The introduction to the edition of the book that I read, though, makes it clear that that simplistic description is not what Hesse actually intended the book to be about. And you can't even boil it down to just a Bildungsroman, because it's more than just the coming-of-age story of an individual. It is also about, like, the coming of age, or the ending of an age, of the institution of Castalia and the glass bead game. It is hard to explain exactly what Castalia and the glass bead game are. They are explained multiple times in different ways from the fictional biographer's perspective, as well as in Joseph Knecht's own words, but for me, it was very complex. The meaning remained a little elusive, and even though I think somewhere in my brain I understand what they mean, what they serve, I have a difficult time putting it into words and summarizing it. To me, Castalia was like a monastery, especially because in history, monasteries have served as preservers and keepers of knowledge, which is exactly what Castalia, as a geographic area dedicated to scholarly pursuits, does. Instead of creating their own knowledge and their own work, Castalians are like ascetic, monkish scholars who just dive into minutiae, the minutiae of music, the minutiae of art, of the sciences, and of all fields. Castalians shun the outside world. They shun world history. They don't want to leave Castalia. They want to ignore the outside world. Even though their existence, their stability, their students, and their funding is at the mercy of the outside world. And I think the monastic metaphor could be expanded to include the cast of characters as well. For example, Joseph Knecht is like the young boy, the young man who is truly called to the religious life and enters into the religious life. His friend Tegularius is like the child oblate given to the monastery when he's very young and can't make decisions himself. And then another one of Knecht's friends is Plinio de Signori, who is like, he's basically the son of a wealthy, powerful family who was sent to Castalia, the monastery, to be educated and then to return to the outside world to discharge his worldly duties and take his rightful place in the outside world. And after reading a whole bunch of Brother Cadfael, which is set in a monastery in the 12th century, all of this just seems so familiar. There is also a religious aspect. At one point, for example, Joseph leaves Castalia and he goes to live in a Benedictine monastery where he goes to teach the monks as well as Father Jacobus the basics of the glass bead game, and part of his purpose in being there is to educate Father Jacobus, who is a very influential man, about what Castalia really is and what it really isn't, because Jacobus has anti-Castalian views because he views the glass bead game as like a religious substitution, like a substitution for God, like what Castalians worship, what they have ritual ceremonies about. And Joseph tries to tell him this is not the way it really is, but I personally, while reading it, was going, yes, I think the glass bead game kind of is your religion. And on top of this, when Joseph is finally installed as the Magister Ludi, or the master of the Glass Bead Game, his investment, his clothing, his bearing reminded me of nothing more than the investment of a new pope. Anyway, the central story is more than just a mere recounting of the life of Joseph Knecht, because it becomes the story also of Castalia, because Joseph, as you are shown, has been the champion and representative of Castalia. And he is the first to recognize that the Castalian culture, Castalian academia, is on the verge of decay and collapse, because Castalians have basically ignored the outside forces that threaten it. My favorite thing about this book was definitely the Glass Bead Game itself, because it is like a theory of everything. It's a game in which there are symbols for everything from all fields, arts and sciences alike, and when you play a game, you are showing the connections between any and all things. And I love that idea so much, especially because I'm a very firm believer that you shouldn't separate the arts from the sciences. You shouldn't separate literature from science. One of the most famous works in that debate about literature versus science and the cultures being separated is C.P. Snow's The Two Cultures. And after having read that essay in college, after having had lectures and discussions about it, I fall in that camp of people who think that you shouldn't just situate yourself in one field like art and then blindly ignore or actively despise other opposite fields of study just because you're an artist and you think that you can't also be an artist and a scientist. It's really important to me as a person who has very widespread and very polar opposite interests in many cases, so I kind of embraced the idea of the Glass Bead Game because it gives that answer to how do you bring everything together? How do you have a theory of everything that doesn't exclude merely because of differences? What I didn't like about this book was that Castalia seemed so shallow and ignorant and willfully isolationist, and I'm not sure that I like what the idea of Castalia says about the role and the value and of knowledge and access to knowledge, because it felt that Hesse was kind of saying or implying, consciously or subconsciously, that knowledge is for the few, the elite, the scholars, and that even the point of preserving knowledge isn't necessarily to preserve it for humanity, it's to preserve it for the people who care, who are the people who are the most privileged, and I don't really like that idea. But I do think that that is a reflection on the times in which Hesse wrote. The novel has the feel and the flavor of the academic culture in the 1940s and the 1950s, which I think was much more elite and exclusionary than it is now. Characters. Let's talk about Joseph Knecht for a little bit. Joseph is so perfect. Knecht is the white knight who, makes the ultimate sacrifice to save Castalia from itself, but it's like he has no personality. He's so perfect. He has no flaws. Even his potential flaws are turned into just praise for his foresight. Everything that he does, no matter how you want to interpret it, is good. I think that part of this might be what Hesse intended. He intended the Glass Bead Game to be kind of ironic, kind of a parody of the biography genre, and that would explain a lot about why the fictional biographer comes across as a little smug and a little obsequious about his subject matter. Ultimately, I quite liked the intellectual challenge of reading the first two-thirds of the book. The first two-thirds are that fictionalized biography of Joseph, and the last part are the posthumous writings of Joseph, which consists of poetry, which I have zero connection to, and then the 3 lives of Joseph Knecht. And those 3 lives were actually short stories that Hesse wrote prior to writing or finishing the novel itself. This book was enough outside of my usual reading range, my usual comfort zone, that I didn't really connect with it all the time. I mostly felt like it was just a real intellectual journey, that it wasn't really entertaining, more that I was entertaining myself by trying to dissect its structure. I had a lot of fun dissecting the structure of the whole story, as well as figuring out how I thought Castalian culture and the Glass Bead Game were constructed. That was interesting to me, but the essential life story of Joseph Knecht and the journey he goes on wasn't really super interesting to me. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads because I think the book is very good, but I did not have a huge emotional connection to it. What I would like to do is go on and read another one of Hermann Hesse's works. I would really like to read Siddhartha because I'm already wondering at what parallels I can draw between Siddhartha and the life of Joseph Knecht. That is it for this review. The Glass Bead Game is a really complex book that is hard to review. I have left out a whole bunch of my thoughts and my commentary and explanations of what happens in the book just for, well, otherwise this would be a humongously long video. But if you would like to talk more about the Glass Bead Game or Hermann Hesse as an author, I would love to. Please just comment down below, and I will be back with another video soon. So until then, bye.